brought the kitchen sink with me this morning. I've got everything here. Morning, church. So I'm Nikki. I am wife to Steve and mum to Hannah and Abigail. And we've been part of Ascot Life Church now for about 5 years, and I'm excited to be here this morning. We have been working through a series looking at the wisdom in Proverbs. Previously, Simon shared thoughts on how Proverbs offers us wisdom for life. And last week, Liz looked at how Proverbs offers us wisdom in our friendship. It falls on me to explore how Proverbs offers us wisdom in how we use our words. And actually, it feels a real privilege to be talking about that this morning in light of some of the words that have been spoken, because I think some of the words spoken this morning have been so moving and so apparent that God is in this place with us. But in many ways, I think I got the easy topic. Proverbs is littered with verses about our words. I did a quick tally and I reached about 80. And you'll be pleased I'm not planning to share all 80 this morning. But it is no surprise there are so many verses because us humans love to talk. In fact, as the old British Telecom advert told us, it is good to talk. Apparently, the average Brit speaks 7,000 words a day. Some of us will speak more like 10,000, and we speak them at a rate of about 150 words a minute. So I could tell you how many words are in my talk and how long that's going to take, but I'll leave you to figure that one out at the end. Now, not all our words will be meaningful. Some will be purely functional, instructions or questions with both, instructions or questions, like in our house, what do you want for tea? Or have you fed the dog? The answer to which is invariably no. But whilst we should take care with the tone we use to deliver those functional words, those words are not the focus of our attention this morning. The remainder of our words are the significant ones, the conversational ones, the ones we use in meaningful interactions with both our Christian and our non-Christian friends, our family, our peers, our colleagues, and even strangers. It is these significant words that will be the focus of our attention this morning. But before I get any further, let me use my words to pray. So, Father, as we consider the words we are speaking this morning, may we look to you for guidance. And as David wrote in the Psalms, may the words of our mouths and the meditations of our hearts be pleasing to you, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. So I'm sure we're keen to dig into what Proverbs has to say about how we use our words. But before we do, I think it is helpful to acknowledge two truths about the nature of our words. And the first is this, that our words have power. Anyone who knows me will know that I'm a little bit obsessed with Genesis. So it won't surprise you that I'm going to start with a reference to Genesis. But actually, we only need to turn to Genesis 1, verse 3 to see the power of words. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. In God, the world's first orator, we see the power of divine words in action. And as we know, Genesis goes on to tell us that we were made in his image. Of all the creatures on the planet, we are the only ones made with the ability to communicate through spoken word. And whilst our words do not have the divine power to speak worlds into existence, they do have power. They have power to inspire, to encourage, to educate, to console, to create beauty through stories and poetry, to worship, to bless, and to pray, just to list a few. Our ability to speak is a unique gift, and we must use it in a way that honours our God in whose image we were made. Because if we don't, in Genesis 3, we see the flip side of this power. In the story of the serpent, we see the destructive power of deceptive words that lead humans to a choice that ultimately leads to death. It is this destructive power of words that causes James to write in his New Testament passage or letter that the tongue is a world of evil amongst the parts of the body. Because in the same way our words have the power to build up, so also do our words have the power to tear down, to criticize, to belittle, to undermine, which is so harmful to those on the receiving end, particularly when those people are vulnerable or children. A few years ago, IKEA produced a short film as part of an anti-bullying campaign. Maybe you saw it. They placed 2 pot plants in a school foyer. The pupils were told to speak kindly to one and unkindly to the other. The first flourished, the second wilted. Now, who knows if these results are actually true? I suspect not. But regardless, they demonstrate this first truth, that our words have power. But we must also recognize that our words demonstrate the nature of our hearts. Proverbs 20:27 states, "The human spirit is the lamp of the Lord that sheds light on one's innermost being." Except if you read the footnote in the NIV translation, and then you will discover that this could equally translate as, "A person's words are the lamp of the Lord that shed light on one's innermost being." Or to paraphrase, our words act as a magnifying glass on the truth of our hearts. As Christians, we are set apart, called to follow Christ and called to be Christ-like, which begins with our hearts, but also our mouths. It is why Matthew writes, Jesus said, "But I tell you that men will have to give account on the day of judgment for every empty word they have spoken. For by your words you will be acquitted, and by your words you will be condemned." Jesus recognized the significance of the words we speak because they act as a lamp onto our innermost being. I hope you and I will not be condemned for the odd misplaced word. We all make mistakes, although it is right that we seek forgiveness when we do. But when our words are regularly destructive to others, when we are routinely using our words to knock other people down, if our words are tinged with bitterness, then we need to consider the state of our hearts. And if we find our hearts lacking, we need to turn to God for forgiveness and for healing. Because if we want to be Christ-like in our hearts, we must be Christ-like in our mouths. The question then is, what guidance can we glean from Proverbs to address these 2 truths? And fortunately, Proverbs offers us plenty. Firstly, Proverbs provides some very practical guidance on the kind of talk we should avoid. A comprehensive list of do nots, which include: do not use foul or corrupt language. Proverbs tells us this language is perverse, and as we will come on to see, perverse language is the language of the enemy. Do not lie or slander or give false witness. Proverbs tells us the Lord detests lying lips. Do not boast or deride your neighbor or curse your parents. In other words, do not knock down the people around you or try and elevate yourself at their expense, remembering that if in God's kingdom the first shall be last, elevating yourself is a bit of a thankless task anyway. And do not stir up conflict or gossip. As Proverbs tells us, a gossip separates good friends, and Eliz talked just last week about the significance of our good friendships and the need to protect them. I don't know about you, but I am guilty of many of these, be it often in ways that feel quite low level. These ways of speaking are very human, aren't they? And easy to get sucked into, especially if those we are talking with are talking like this. It's so easy to just join in the conversation. But when considered in light of both the power of our words and the light it shines on our hearts, you can see the harm these ways of talking can cause, the pain they can trigger, the damage, however unintentional, they can do, not just to those on the receiving end, but also to our relationship with God. And so the author of Proverbs was absolutely right to spell out that these behaviours should be avoided, because using our words in these ways just doesn't build community and it doesn't honour God. But then, if we know why our words matter, and we know what types of words to avoid. What should we be saying if we want our hearts to show us to be Christ-like? And here, the guidance in Proverbs becomes slightly more coded. So we're going to spend some time looking at 3 verses which suggest 3 ways of speaking. That we should be speaking God's wisdom, that we should be speaking God's grace, and that we should be speaking God's salvation. So that's where we're headed this morning. Speaking God's wisdom, let's turn to Proverbs 18:4. The words of a man's mouth are deep waters, but the fountain of wisdom is a rushing stream. Now, I should flag that various Bible translations have made slightly different interpretations in their translation of this proverb. I'm drawing on commentaries that are focused on the NIV translation because I think it offers helpful insight into the wisdom we should be sharing. That said, it still took me a little while to wrap my head around this one. Deep waters initially sound good, don't they? In our culture, to think deeply is held up as a gold standard. It suggests you have interrogated your thoughts, thrashed out the different arguments, and the conclusions you've reached are wise and well-rounded. Deep thinkers, academics, philosophers, social commentators are often held up as people to look to for wisdom. So why are deep waters described as contrary to the rushing waters of wisdom? To understand the message, we need to consider the quality of the water itself. In my family, growing up, we used to hike for mile after tedious mile over Dartmoor. I hated it. And sometimes we would need extra water. Maybe you've watched those survival programs when they have discussed where to get water when you are in need. If faced with the choice of running water or deep, still water, you should consider the running water. Running water will be clean and fresh. It will hydrate you and satisfy your thirst and sustain your life. But the deep water is very likely stagnant, full of bacteria, bad for drinking. In fact, it has the potential to make you very sick indeed. Equally, if on your expedition you need to wash, the experts would point you to a clear running stream. Who knows what is lurking in the murky depths of deep water? And if anyone loves a jump scare, a YouTube video of a crocodile jumping out of a murky pool will certainly do it for you. And so I believe what this proverb is saying is that we should be wary of both receiving and imparting human wisdom. Human wisdom, which often seems deep, can be murky, obscured by human motivations. It is instead in the fountain of God's wisdom that we should be seeking and then offering answers, the kind of wisdom that can quench our thirst and cleanse world-weary souls, a wisdom that is countercultural, that tells us not to store up treasures on earth, but to store them up in heaven, to turn the other cheek to an aggressor. If someone takes your coat, to give them your shirt as well. This is the wisdom of the rushing stream, and this is the wisdom we must speak when our friends, our family, our colleagues are in need of advice or guidance. And it's the wisdom we should be using when we're discussing global affairs on the local or the global scale. It's God's wisdom we should be drawing on. Not the wisdom we find in magazines and newspaper columns. Not the wisdom we get from social media influencers on TikTok or Instagram, and not the wisdom of advertisers trying to convince us that we will only be enough if we have the product or the experience they are selling. No, rather it is the biblical, countercultural wisdom of God, whose word, as we read in Psalm 119, is a lamp to our feet and a light to our path. And it can be the same for others, Christian or non-Christian, when we have the courage to share it. So Christ-like hearts speak God's wisdom, but they also speak God's grace. Proverbs 16:24. Gracious words are honeycomb, sweet to the soul and healing to the bones. Honey is a pretty unique substance. Aside from being naturally sweet, honey is pure. It isn't processed. It heals. We all know honey and lemon is the recipe for a sore throat, and it preserves. Apparently, if you stumbled across a jar of honey in an Egyptian archaeological dig, it would still be edible today. Who knows? So it is easy to accept that good words are like honey to the body and soul. But key to this proverb is the concept of grace. I've recently been reading this awesome book, God of All Things, by Andrew Wilson, who I hear from the young people who just got back from New Day, ran a number of really powerful seminars there. It explores the deeper God significance of everyday things in the human world, and chapter 9 looks at honey. According to the book, there are 60 references to honey in the Bible, and in those references, honey is used to represent three things, one of which is God's grace. And I'll let you read the book to discover the other two. When God provides food to the moaning and, dare I say, somewhat undeserving Israelites as they wander in the wilderness, that manna from heaven, it is described as tasting like honey. When God brings forth water from a rock, David describes this in the Psalms as honey. When God introduces Moses to the promised land, he describes the land as flowing with milk and honey. Honey represents God's abundant and undeserved grace towards his people, towards us. His love, his mercy, his compassion, which we have done nothing to earn, and yet he gives us freely. A grace we should strive to emulate in our own actions and, for the context of this talk, in our words. What this proverb is saying is that when we speak with the same grace God offered the Israelites in those honey-laden references, a grace that he offered abundantly, undeservedly, and freely, then the effects will be sweet and they will lead to healing. A grace we must speak, even in, or perhaps that should be particularly in, those difficult conversations where there is pain or anger involved, when there is disagreement, when there is judgment, when there are viewpoints that offend our values. This isn't easy. Far easier to shout back than meet hostility with love. But we must actively choose to speak graciously, even in these moments. It's that same instruction Paul wrote in his letter to the Ephesians: be completely humble and gentle, be patient, bearing with one another in love. And it's that same forgiveness we've heard talked about this morning with regard to our memories. When conversations start to become shaped by anger, by frustration, by disappointment, or by disagreement, in the heat of that moment, we must stop, pause, and bear with one another in love. This doesn't mean we should accept words thrown at us if they are cruel or unjust, but it does mean that our responses should be tempered with kindness, compassion, love, and with grace. Because it's the same grace we are offered by our Almighty Father despite all our wrongdoings. And so if we want Christ-like hearts, we